Thank you for setting up.
Yeah.
Good way to do it.
Ready?
Yep.
All right, it's 7 p.m. and I will call the meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee to order. Today is Thursday, June 5th, 2025. It is 7 p.m. here in the Aldermanic Chamber. Tonight's meeting was duly noticed in two places, including the city's website in accordance with RSA 91A22. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr. Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest A. Jetty.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens. Alderman Tyler Govia, Vice Chair.
I am here.
We also have with us tonight Alderman Tim Sennett. That is it.
Matt Sullivan.
And Matt Sullivan on line, Community Development Director. And I think we're also expecting Sam Durfee, Planning Manager.
Excellent.
Walked in.
There he is, just on time.
Alderman Moran is not here tonight, so I will be the presiding officer. So without any further ado, we will move into the public hearing portion of the meeting. Tonight we have a public hearing on O-25-055, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding specific uses in the general industrial zone where overlain by transit-oriented development. Mr. Durfee, were you here to introduce the ordinance that we have the public hearing on? Or do you have anything you want to say about it?
Sure. I don't, for the record, Sam Durfee, Planning Manager. I don't want to take any wind out of the sails of Alderman Sennett, as
Oh,
he's
sorry,
really
I did not realize you were the prime on that.
Mr. Durfee wants me to set the table, I'm happy to, and then he can pick up with the more technical aspects of it.
By all means.
All right, thank you. So this ordinance seeks to clarify and make work a little more harmoniously the general industrial zones when it's overlain with a transit-oriented development zone. It shouldn't come as any surprise to folks familiar with the zoning map that this does spin out of a several years-long controversial issue that took place in Ward 7, where there was a proposed asphalt plant proposed for a general industrial zone with a transit-oriented development overlay. The crux of the argument on either side of that was that at the time an asphalt manufacturing plant was allowed or permitted by use in a general industrial zone, but conflicted with the goals of a transit-oriented development. This, in my opinion, seeks to clarify the transit-oriented development a little bit, add some provisions to it that would fit more in line with those goals in terms of a transit-oriented development, allowing for more commercial use, residential use, and how those two pieces would fit together when the TOD that's overlain is over a general industrial zone. So that's what I'm seeking to accomplish here. And if Mr. Durfee wants to come forward with any more technical aspects, I'd be happy to cede to him.
Thank you.
So what we did, we combed through the use table and we identified, this was an opportunity, I'll start with, just by saying, to identify the really heavy industrial uses that would likely inherently conflict with high-density residential development, in these more historic areas of the city that are well built out, but are also going through kind of a revitalization, if you will. So the idea was to call out those heavy industrial, potentially noxious uses, either through noise, dust, debris, odors, things like that, that you would not want in close proximity to high-density residential. So we identified those uses, and while none, I believe, are expressly prohibited, we took sensitivity to the fact that we have a general industrial district with a TOD on top of it, essentially allowing everything to occur at relatively high intensities. So the most potentially noxious uses were deemed to be either not allowed in general industrial districts with the TOD overlay. However, then also there are some that were less noxious, but still you would qualify as heavy industry, that were allowed, but now require a conditional use permit from the planning board. So that's site plan and conditional use. And if you recall from the asphalt plant public hearings, there was a lot of debate around coexistence of uses, that's really what the CUP criteria would get further into. So just basically utilizing an existing procedure that we have as another check when these things come forward.
Great. Any questions, comments? Yeah, Alderman
I
Senate.
just wanted to add, one of the goals that I had brought to Mr. Durfee when I first proposed this to him was that as we contemplated this specific zone, because to the best of my knowledge, this is the only GI with a TOD laying over it in the city.
There's actually one off of DW Highway in the south of Nashville,
Okay.
I believe. Yes.
But regardless, the idea was there are businesses operating today, and the idea was not to box them out. The idea was to allow them to continue business as usual, especially in the zone that I contemplated when bringing this forward. We have Reapano Stoneworks, we have Newport Construction, there's a materials yard there. They're all operating today, and the idea was to not box them out, not interrupt their processes, just clarify what could be proposed for that area going forward.
Absolutely. I see Alderman Clemmons has joined us on Zoom. I have him down at 7:03 PM. Andy has his hand risen if you have a question.
I don't, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I am participating remotely because I am out of town, and there's no one in the room with me, and I'm going to stay off camera because my internet is spotty.
No worries at all. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to fit into the new zoning and all that. This doesn't alter that or have any consequence either way on that. This is good.
I hate to use the word Band-Aid, but it is kind of a temporary measure where something so comprehensive really would get into this in a lot more granularity. However, this is, I think, a very good holdover until we're much more holistic and intentional with the recoding effort.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question myself. In the most simplest form, what does this do? We use a lot of big words and how the overlays are. For a member of the public doesn't know much about zoning, what does this do?
It seeks to eliminate potential conflict with highest concentration of residents and highest intensity industrial uses. Those uses can still occur elsewhere in the city where the potential for that conflict doesn't exist.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other clarifying questions from members of the committee? Alderman Jettie.
So could you just review, I'm looking quickly, so I think this is just related to general industrial that is within a transit overlay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm looking at the general industrial column, and I see there are a bunch of Ps, which means permitted as of right, and then there's some Cs, means as a conditional use. What does that mean? What's the difference? Permitted as of right means it's permitted as of right. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's no nuance there, is there?
There's still site plan review. So it's a permitted use in the district, but you would still go through the site plan procedures, ensuring that site circulation, drainage, landscaping, all of the site standards that we have are applied, and the design complies with those.
Okay. Now, what about conditional use?
So conditional use, basically, the use is permitted subject to conditions. Essentially, that's what a conditional use permit is. Very similar to site plan. However, conditional use permits we have some standard conditions that we have to evaluate conditional uses by. However, we have the ability to develop and further refine those based on specific uses. They're currently quite robust, and we felt comfortable that subjecting these heavier industry uses to a conditional use permit in the GI TOD districts would be sufficient in giving the board enough latitude to really figure out either proper mitigation or determine that the potential to coexist it's infeasible. It's another layer of review and approval.
Okay, so the Cs have a superscript 5 on them, and it's in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, the amendment says, facilities with a primary use designated with the superscript 5 shall not be permitted in a general industrial zone which are overlain by a transit-oriented development overlay district. So for those items listed that would be subject to a conditional permit in a general industrial area are prohibited if they're in a transit.
Correct.
overlay.
So the most heavy and potentially noxious industrial uses are not going to be permitted where the TOD overlies a GI, but in the pure general industrial districts, they will be conditional uses.
Okay. Thank you.
All set, Alderman Jettie?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Any other clarifying questions from members of the committee? Great. Okay, so I will now call for testimony in favor. Seeing none, I will call for testimony in opposition. Seeing none, I will then again call for testimony in favor. And once again, I'll call for testimony in opposition. Seeing none in the chamber, I will close the public hearing at 7:11 PM, and then I will open the regular meeting at 7:12 PM. Public comment. Is there any member of the public wishing to comment on any pending legislation tonight? Seeing none, we will move into communications. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you. We have a communication from Sam Durfee, Planning Manager, regarding referral from the Board of Aldermen on resolutions R25-159, R-25-160, R-25-161, R-25-166, and that's it. That's all I got. Oh, yeah, and the amendment petition for street discontinuance regarding a portion of Veterans Memorial Parkway. I was looking for a number.
Thank you. There being no objection, I will accept the communication and place it on file. Petitions,
There's none.
unfinished business,
There's none.
new business resolutions.
We have R-25-159, approving and authorizing execution of the First Amendment to the Master Development Agreement and approving amended Master Concept Plan. I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage as redevelopment of Mohawk Tannery.
Excellent, thank you. Ready when you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you very much for hearing me tonight. I am Michael Devon, the project manager for Blaylock Holdings, the organization that is set out to remediate and redevelop the Mohawk Tannery site. As you all are aware, the Mohawk Tannery site is adjacent to the Nashua River in a great location along Route 3 and then within close proximity to downtown Nashua. Back in 2020, the EPA and Blaylock Holdings entered an agreement by which Blaylock would be the bona fide prospective purchaser in order to clean up the Mohawk Tannery under the supervision of the EPA. Currently, we've updated our agreement with the EPA to include an additional $3.5 million committed by the EPA, which is in public comment right now. It was approved by DOJ as well as senior levels of US DOJ. The reason why the EPA is involved, as you all are aware, there are two very sizable lagoons full of carcinogenic sludge that sits along the Nashua River within the 100-year floodplain. The Mohawk Tannery has been in existence or was founded in the 1920s. These lagoons sitting within the 100-year floodplain, obviously the odds increase year over year that there could be a environmental catastrophe. On the site, there are also scattered carcinogenic sludge throughout, as well as a whole host of asbestos and other bad materials. The goal that we are set out to do is to clean up the site and consolidate it within these lagoons and elevate it above the 500-year floodplain and put a permanent impermeable cap over the top. Once we're able to do that, we will then redevelop the land. It's a 40-acre site into 546 homes, 230 apartments, as well as 316 for-sale condominiums. The legislation before you that I would ask for a favorable recommendation updated our master development agreement, which this committee reviewed and the larger board approved previously. As we've been working with the EPA and DES for several years now, developing the plan to clean up the site, each time we've made progress on the design that has caused the price to increase with the contractor. We have finally reached a final number with the contractor. We're set to sign that contract with them soon. But because of those cost increase, we had certain adjustments that we wanted to make in order to make the deal work and allow us to go forward. Based on our needs and our collaborative effort with city staff, we came up with the amendment before this committee. The amendment has a variety of different items. City staff and Blaylock have been working together now, again, for quite a long time. Sam Durfee, Matt Sullivan, Tim Cummings, Celia Leonard, Amy DeRoche, Dan Hudson have all been working tirelessly. I can't count the number of phone conversations, meetings that we've had before and leading up to these amendments. One of the amendments that is before you is to allow us to lease the Parkway parcel. The Parkway parcel is owned by the city, but the city, when we purchase the Parkway parcel, doesn't get any of the funds because the money will go to the Federal Highway Administration. But with that, there's a significant price tag of $990,000. In order to make the budget work, we asked the city if they'd be willing to allow us to lease it during the remediation to allow for us to get through the vast majority of the remediation before purchasing that Parkway parcel with conventional funding, allowing our budget to work so that we could actually do the work. We also updated the master concept plan to allow for certain changes. For instance, the southern parcel is now no longer going to be deeded to the city to maintain and care for in perpetuity. Instead, it will stay with the development, but it will be opened up for public access via an easement for passive recreation. This is undevelopable land, but there is an opportunity to have trails and things like that. In addition, we are also opening up the main containment lot, which once remediated will have a cap which will allow for recreation. It's contemplated that there will be a dog park, trails, benches to overlook the river, look over to Mine Falls Park, as well as a tot lot here as well. There is a public canoe and kayak launch, which has always been contemplated to be open to the public, as well as a river walk, which was always contemplated to be part of the public. In addition, there will be a conveyance of Lot 10 to the city, where the city could potentially put it in a playground for the Little Florida neighborhood, or a marker indicating, the history of Mohawk Tannery, or whatever the city deems necessary. But we would now convey that lot to the city. In addition, as part of our discussions with the EPA and DES and the design work, the 100% design that we've submitted to the EPA, which is being resubmitted tomorrow, is at completion. But what we discovered was that the containment cell, which is full of sludge and will be getting more sludge added on, it takes a significant amount of time potentially up to a year for that sludge to consolidate to the point where you can put the cap on without fear of differential settlement, where, you know, this section of the cap settles this far, this section settles that far. In order to make it even and smooth and allow for the cap to go on, we have to wait for materials to settle. That would obviously throw us behind in our development schedule of the housing, but it would also cause a lot of issues. So we, with the EPA and DES's agreement, have bifurcated the project where we have the development site, which is the vast majority of the site, versus the containment cell, as two separate projects in a way with the EPA and DES, so that they are able to sign off on the main development parcel while that containment parcel settles, allowing us to install the initial infrastructure work you see here highlighted in yellow, which will then allow us to be right on schedule with the regular building construction, so that when we get the sign off on the containment cell, we can start on our first building right away. It also updates the phasing plan and schedules to be up to date, given the delays with the design effort that we've undergone. It further accelerates the $2 million loan that the city is giving to us for the remediation effort from 4 payments to 2, as part of our give to the city for these asks that we made. As I said, it allows for recreation on the containment lot for all of the public. It changes the southern parcel conveyance. It gives the conveyance of Lot 10. And then it also will confirm that the city will be an additional insured on Blaylock's 10-year, $15 million environmental policy, so that the city is protected should something go wrong over those 10 years. And then once we are closed, and it's projected around August, July 15th, August is where we're targeting. We are ready to go. Financing is in place. Our plans will be approved. We'll have our redevelopment permits in place, and then we'll be ready to go. It's been a tremendous effort by a lot of people, and I get to stand before you all reporting it, but it's truly amazing, the effort.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the Parkway parcel, I think is what you called it,
Yes, sir.
that when that is eventually purchased, that the money, the purchase price is not going to end up with the city, it's going to end up with the federal highway?
That's
So
correct.
why is that?
That's because the funds that were used to develop the parkway, the Broad Street Parkway, a significant amount came from the feds. And so that land is basically theirs, that the city owns, but the funds then would go to the highway administration.
Okay. And you mentioned the infrastructure in yellow. So what does that consist of?
That will be the main spine road, as well as the utilities that are needed for the first building, water, electric, things like that. Because we will have our contractor out there for the containment cell and the rest of the remediation effort, it only makes sense to have them there on site as they're finishing up with the containment cell to do that work in conjunction. But it will be all the necessary infrastructure to get us to that first building. But plus, we, through obligations in the MDA, as well as the overlay district, have an obligation to build this infrastructure road to the adjacent land as well. So that's why the yellow goes all the way up.
Okay. And one last one, I think. So you mentioned the southern parcel that this is being changed. Who owns that southern parcel now? And if this amendment goes through, Yeah, I think you said that you're going to retain ownership of it, but the city's going to have an easement on it. Can you explain that?
Yes, sir. So this parcel, as well as, let's call it right here, is currently owned by the Chester Realty Trust, which is the trust for the former owners of the Mohawk Tannery site. So we don't own any of the land now. We have it all under contract to purchase once we have everything in place to start the work. So once we purchase the land, it will then be Blaylock's land. This southern parcel is not developable land. It's full of wetlands, vernal pools. It's within the floodplain. And so it's never been contemplated to have any sort of development. But we previously had discussed with city staff about conveying the land to the city for the city to use for recreation. And not to speak for the city staff, but that taking on that land is a lot of effort. The city was concerned about it never being developed, as well as allowing it to be open space. So they were able to achieve their objectives by making sure that it stays within the community's control. So it won't necessarily be Blaylock, but it will be the community, because there will be a homeowners association that's set up, and then they will own the land. But the city will have easements all throughout this project. For instance, the public will be able to walk along this road that I'm highlighting on my mouse, all the way through, come along the Riverwalk, use a canoe or a kayak off the launch, walk along the Riverwalk, which would lead to a pedestrian bridge over to Mine Falls Park, which is contemplated as well for us to build. Or they could take a turn and sit along some of the benches, use the dog park, go over the tot lot, or even walk within these trails that will be maintained.
Okay, and so will the Riverwalk, I'm assuming, I can't see it, but I'm assuming the Riverwalk ends at the bridge if a bridge is built?
Yes, right here,
Okay. And so the southern parcel,
this green space.
yeah, and so would the city have the right to develop trails to continue that, pedestrian access to some degree? So the public could walk along the river?
Yes, sir. So there are restrictions on this land. Fish and Game have recommendations that are required that have to be imposed on that land because it's such a valuable resource in terms of vernal pools and floodplains. But there are already trails now. So it still needs to be developed with Fish and Game in terms of what level of trails that we can have, but it is contemplated that the trails will be there. So I can't specifically ask that the Riverwalk, or I can't specifically answer that the Riverwalk could be extended without knowing what Fish and Game is going to be thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from members of the committee? I'll just check, make sure Alderman Clemens doesn't have his hand up. He does not. Anybody else? Yeah, Alderman Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question regarding the timeline, just so I can understand that. The initial infrastructure that you want to build through the, looks like the bulk of it is through the yellow phase there, which I know is the old Thimble Door site. That won't begin until all the ground toxins are at least within the containment cell. Is that correct?
Yes. So it's driven both because of public health as well as construction financing. So they go hand in hand. A conventional lender who would normally fund the development side of this project doesn't want anything to do with the remediation. So they're not going to loan the money until the site's cleaned up. But we have private equity funds that will come in for this initial infrastructure work to keep us on schedule for the redevelopment timeline to be the way that it should be.
So the idea is that the grounds are clean, the material is settling in the cell, but it's at least in a state that you can begin upturning the ground and begin working.
Yes. Well, So let's go back to here. So where you see the Fimble door factory itself, that's a whole bunch of asbestos that was consolidated from the Parkway development. And then you have these scattered bits and pieces. This is actually its own lagoon. The Fimble door company made a deal with the Chester Realty Trust, and they built their own lagoon full of carcinogenic sludge here. And then there's, like I said, scattered waste throughout. So during that first phase, where we're cleaning up the development site, we're collecting and digging up and testing ad nauseum the site so that we know that we got everything. And consolidating all of these carcinogenic materials into these lagoons because we'll be building a giant secant pile wall, which will encase it and keep it within that area. And then once it's confirmed that this site is clean, and again, it's a whole lot of testing, the EPA and DES, New Hampshire DES, will certify that the development site, everything but these containment cells, is clean and it's ready for work. So that's where we'll be cleared to do that initial infrastructure work. But we won't have the funds to do the full project. But it allows us to keep the timing on the right trajectory while the containment cell is settling. But the containment cell, while it settles, will have a temporary cap.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Just check Zoom one more time. Seeing none, I will call for the vote. This will be a roll call vote because we have Alderman Clemmons on Zoom. If the clerk could please call the roll.
Alderman Ernie Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Ben Clemmons,
Yes.
Alderman Tyler Govea,
Yes.
and Alderman Derek Tebow is a yes. So 4 yeses, 0 nays. Passes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I approach just to get my USB?
Absolutely.
Thanks, sir.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next order of business, Mr. Clerk.
All right, we have R-25-174. I'd like to make a motion for final passage authorizing the purchase and sale agreement of 44 Broad Street.
Thank you, Director Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Michael Devon for his setting up a page relative to the cases where sometimes the proceeds from a sale of a property do not in fact go back to the city, but are in fact returned to the Department of Transportation or Federal Highways, because that's actually the case with the piece of legislation before you. But by way of a brief introduction, I'm actually going to share my screen if I do have the ability, Mr. I'm not sure if I do. Give it a shot. 44 Broad Street is located just adjacent to the property that you just reviewed a few moments ago. This is a site of approximately 1.26 acres. If you know this intersection between Broad and the Veterans Memorial Parkway, or formerly the Broad Street Parkway, you know this is a complicated intersection. There's limited access to this site at 44 Broad Street. But this possession as surplus after the land had been taken for the development of the Broad Street Parkway. And so the city retained ownership. But like the piece of land that that was discussed before, a portion of it, this property and any sale proceeds from its sale by the city will in fact be returned to the Federal Highway Administration. And so when we talk about the purchase price of approximately $450,000 during the course of the discussion tonight, remember that's not going back to the city. More introduction into this property. One of the things that's interesting about it, and it's contemplated in the legislation before you, is that like legislation that was actually discussed at a separate weeks ago at 115 West Hollis Street, this property was identified to have a strategic value to the city, partially because of its local gateway area, but also because of the environmental condition of the property, which is in fact an asbestos-laden site that requires great care when handling it. And so I'm happy to talk about that in some detail tonight. But what is critical is that because of those two factors, the location, the strategic value, and the asbestos, we ultimately decided to dispose of this property through an alternative method to the typical auction process. So in fact, the city put this property out for sale, working with the project, and ultimately working with several potential buyers, selected a buyer that's identified within the purchase and sale agreement before you. This buyer to develop the property into a medical office building or a medical use. The details of that build out are not known to us in full, but I'll get into that in just a minute and what that will look like moving forward. The purchase price is in fact about $450,000, which would be paid upon closing to the city of Nashua. There's about $10,000, or actually $10,000 that would be agreement is executed. A further $10,000 would be paid when the inspection period is concluded, and then another $10,000 would be paid at the time of the permit process. One note on that front is that a lot of these items are contingent upon the permitting process. Just direct everyone's attention, if you do have the legislation in front of you, to section 6.2 and attachment A. There's this blank attachment A that refers to a development plan or a build-out plan that the city staff would review. You'll note that the buyer will be asked to produce a development plan, a concept plan, sent that to the city of Nashua for review and approval 45 days within the closing of this agreement. So should the Board of Aldermen choose to approve the purchase and sale agreement, city staff would actually play a role in identifying what the site's build-out looks like, what the design looks like, and again, back to the strategic value of this property, whether or not that build-out is in alignment with the city's goals. Provided that it is, the buyer would then have the opportunity to close on the property. They'd be subject to all of the customary planning board and other processes, providing that the site's developed as those regulatory processes. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer other questions about the specific site or about the purchase. But generally, I think we're all happy to dispose of this property, having seen it on the market for several years and entertained potential offers for the site. I will just note, if you thought about this and think, oh, this could have been a housing or a far more elaborate mixed-use development, we did have several conversations with potential buyers about just that. Two factors really that led us, and I think led the development community away from that. One, the site's access, the inability to turn left onto Broad Street and access the highway, constraint for a larger redevelopment of the site. But more than that, the asbestos condition to the south of the site, or screen, the bottom of the screen, the bank of the canal, that is also a critical issue when it comes to redevelopment of the property. And really only the cleared area that you can see here, both topographically and from an environmental perspective, limited the development potential of this property. With that, happy to answer any questions that you, Mr. Chair, or the committee might have.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. I see Alderman Clemmons has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you. So my question is, was this property originally taken for the Broad Street Parkway by the city, and then what was there prior to it being, we took it, I guess?
Mr. Chair, if I may address Alderman Clemmons' question, it was in fact taken the state of New Hampshire as part of the Broad Street Parkway effort, Alderman Clemmons. It was taken as part of the right-of-way process because there was some contemplation prior to the section being laid out that a far more significant portion of the property would need to be used than what you see today. And so that's why the entire thing was taken. I almost knew to get the question about the previous use of the property this evening, and I was trying to scour my notes before. And I'm not sure I have that answer in front of me, Alderman Clemmons, so I can get to you, or if you give me a few minutes, I might be able to find that in my records.
Mr. Chair, if I could continue.
Absolutely.
No, that's fine. I guess the only other question I had is, do we have any obligation did we have any obligation, or did we go back to the original owner that they had the potential to buy the property back if they wanted to?
Mr. Chair, to address Alderman Clemmons' question, my knowledge, we did not go back to the prior owner of the property, Alderman Clemmons. Obviously, when the right-of-way process took place, the property free and clear through a petition process, the property owner was paid adequately as part of a market value assessment when the right-of-way process took place. To directly answer your question, to my knowledge, the city did not go back to that prior owner over recent years when we were disposing of the property.
All set, Alderman Clemmons?
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from any other member of the committee? Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, so, Mr. Sullivan, I tried to stop you earlier when you were talking because you were going in and out. So I don't know if there were some gems that you pronounced while you were speaking that we didn't hear because of the audio difficulty. So I hate to ask you to repeat what you said because we may have the same problem, but I kind of recall, you may not know, but at some point in time in this area, there was a company called Eastone. They manufactured laboratory furniture from asbestos. They had big sheets of asbestos that they got from Johns Manville, and they cut them into laboratory countertops, and cut out sinkholes and that type of stuff. And there was a lot of asbestos that they disposed of on the site. And I don't know if this was the site but does that make any difference to us? If there is asbestos there, are we responsible for it, or has that been dealt with?
So, Alderman, thank you for telling me. Might be the case the audio has been broken up on my end as well. Looks like I'm breaking up again. The asbestos is known on site. There's actually an area identified where asbestos contamination is known. We are not a responsible party as the city, to my knowledge, but we did have the ability to disclose that extent as part of the purchase and sale process. No obligation to remediate the asbestos, to dispose of it as part of this process. It was instead disclosed to the buyer. Either leave the asbestos intact, or they can choose to remediate it if their redevelopment will in fact impact that area. For better or worse, much of the site is on the rear of the site for the riverbank or the canal bank, and likely will not need to be impacted as part of the redevelopment. But again, we haven't seen a development plan for the site, so I want to reserve final comments on that until we have an opportunity to review that plan.
Okay, so I didn't understand what you. I understood you to say that there is asbestos on the site that's been disclosed to the buyer, and that the city is not responsible, other than having made the disclosure. That ends our liability for it. But then you said you needed to do something to come up with a final answer. Is that what?
So Alderman Jettie, what I was referring to is that I made a comment that asbestos area that would not be impacted by the proposed development, to my knowledge, but we don't know the final development plan. And so I didn't want to say for sure that there'll be no asbestos disposal area impacts with the redevelopment, but any impacts that are proposed will need to be remediated in accordance with NHDES standards.
And that would be the responsibility of the buyer?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All set, Alderman Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yes, thank you. So, if you went over this, so what happens if we reject the plan that they come up with?
Alderman Clemmons, if we reject the plan that they're required to produce within the 45 days, then to my knowledge, the purchase and sale would functionally be voided. I will say, well, the discretion to approve or reject that plan is in the hands of actually Mr. Durfee himself. We are aware that we need to be practical and realistic in our expectations for the site based on the development footprint and limitations that exist. What I think our heavier weighted concern is the design of the site, particularly with this property being a gateway to Veterans Memorial Parkway and being a gateway to the Mohawk Tannery redevelopment that you contemplated earlier this evening. So design of the site is going to be critical for us when we review that development plan. But should Manager Durfee and myself choose to reject the development plan, I think we'll need a good reason to do so. And I believe that will result in a voiding of the purchase and sale agreement, or a modification potentially there too, if the parties could not agree.
Can I,
Yes.
the proximity to the intersection is a little concerning to me. Can you pull the map back up? Do you have that?
I do, yes. Give me one moment. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
So it's almost as if well, you can see where there's a car kind of pulling out, yeah, right there. Are we concerned all about the ability of a vehicle to be able to navigate that? And let's say they wanted to turn left onto at that intersection there to U-turn to go around. Are we about that at all, or what? Are they going to do a traffic study? Like, do we expect this to be a big impact? I guess those are my questions.
Yeah, so Alderman Clemmons, I think these questions are good because they limit the scale of the development that can happen on the site. And so this was something we did think quite a bit about. So if you had a very high traffic use, such as a quick service restaurant or something of that nature, I absolutely think that this site would not be viable or as a development site for that use.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the use that was, oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Clemmons, if I cut you off.
No, go ahead. Yep, I'm agreeing.
I was just going to
with
say, because the use, medical use, and the is less frequent, we will first of all ask them to produce a traffic impact report at a minimum as part of the development process and the plan. But the trips are infrequent enough where there really truly will not be in and out traffic at all times. And so will there be challenges potentially during peak times for a vehicle to cut across this traffic and get into a left turn lane? Potentially during peak times. It's something they'll have to wait for this queue to clear in order to get. But you are able to make this turn. That is absolutely possible. But I think during peak times there may be challenges. But again, our hope is that that will roll to a far lower traffic volume coming in and out of the site based on the proposed use.
Okay. Final question. It's right in front of there where the island gets wider.
Yep, right here.
If we find that it's an issue, do we have the ability to cut into that and make that left turn lane a little bit longer?
Alderman Clemmons, I don't want to say with certainty that that's possible. You know, I'm not a traffic engineer and I hate to, resist answering the question, but I do think that could be done. But I have to believe there was there's an intentionality to the current queue length that exists and the widening that was done. But I do think if there were significant, that median could be truncated a bit more to lengthen that left turn queue lane, which I think is what you're looking for. But we'd have to confirm with the engineer the possibility. But it's not as though it would impact another travel lane to do that.
All set, Alderman Clemmons?
If we see that that's an opportunity that we could, fix that.
Yep. I think as a follow-up to this conversation tonight, I can absolutely talk to Engineer Hudson and his team and Manager Durfee and see if they have any thoughts about what the trigger from a traffic mitigation perspective. We just haven't had that conversation quite yet, but these are good questions.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this looks like, when I'm just looking at this map here, it looks a lot like what's going on in the south end. Me and Alderman Senate would love to look at how the crossing that lane and going for the U-turn. Boy, I know it's not an apartment building across the street, but boy, it kind of looks like that. So you said that it was a medical facility, like, doctor's appointments type of thing, is that?
Correct.
Do we know, like, how big, like, how many offices would be in there? Because obviously, if it's a one-person, one doctor office, it's not going to be as busy. But if it's a, a three-story building with tons of medical offices in there, it's going to be a little busier, right?
Yes, Alderman Tebow. What I can confirm is it's a sole proprietor medical office that's been proposed. In fact, Dr. Tardos has been identified within the purchase and sale agreement, so I can disclose that. It's not a Hampshire or other larger office here. Now, is it possible there'll be multiple doctors? Yes, but we're not talking about a 6-story structure housing multiple practices within the same building. That's not what's proposed here. It's a much smaller operation.
Follow up.
Yep.
Maybe they could specialize in, like, asbestos poisoning or something. A kid. So to Alderman Clemens' point, a little further down, there's a gas station there, and a lot of times when I'm coming down from the north to come here, I hit the Veterans Memorial Parkway and I'll stop at that gas station, and I have to get out, and I don't have to go into that turning lane, the left turning lane, but it's pretty easy to get out there right now. How it will be here, where you have to cross that lane to get over to take a left, I don't know. But I don't want something to be caused that we have a problem with in another part of the city that we know is a problem we can't really fix right now. So that's the concern I have. So if Dan Hudson, could tell us if he could, shave that median down, that would be a little more helpful too. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? So I will, I go down that part of Broad Street every day. Every time I come here, I'm right there. Use that car wash to the left. Rarely do you have an issue getting into that U-turn lane. It does happen if you're going peak hours, maybe on a Saturday. But for the most part, it's usually pretty easy to get into. One question I do have about the parcel itself is we do have a Welcome to Nashua sign on there. How does that play?
Mr. Chair, we're dealing with that issue now. We are going to have to relocate the sign.
Oof.
We have not determined a location, but we know we need to relocate it as a result.
Okay.
Alderman Tebow is making a face, which makes me think that I need to have a better response to that question.
Absolutely.
I like the sign there too. The fact we're moving it, that kind of stinks.
So I think it would be easy for me to say right now that we're going to relocate it in a location directly. I'd love to, get to that, but I want to talk to some folks before I make that commitment. So
Okay.
I think we'll do everything we can to make sure that this is a way to downtown Nashua and the city of Nashua. I just think we need to resolve an exact location for where that sign will be placed. I'm hoping the Mohawk folks are not in the room right now, because I'll commit to trying to figure out something with them potentially to put it on their property.
And a question to you, Director Sullivan. Who's paying for that? Because taking that sign down is going to cost money. Is that our job or is that their job?
It's our job, Alderman. We erected the sign. We're going to take on the cost of relocating it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How time sensitive is this legislation?
It's time sensitive in the sense that property's been on the market for an extended period of time, years. We haven't had an interested buyer that was viable. If there's a concern about these unanswered questions relative to the sign, to the traffic, I would ambition to try and have those answers prepared for next Manic session rather than a tabling, but I completely understand if you feel that more time is needed. I obviously, we've been waiting years, so if we need month, that's fine too. But could make an effort at least to try and get answers before next week's session if you'd be amenable to that. But happy to do whatever the committee pleases.
Okay, I'll leave that up to my fellow committee members. I don't really want to stop production or development of the city, but at the same time, I think there are some bigger questions here. I know Alderman Clee has a question.
Thank you, and I apologize, I just came in, I was up in planning, so if I'm asking a question that you've already answered, but for full disclosure, planning, without much discussion, gave this a thumbs up. Not that it will have any bearing on the vote here, I just wanted to point that out. But a comment that did come up there, and I don't know if it's been mentioned here, is that there were other bids for this property of manufacturing and so on, but this was the least intrusive, I guess is the proper word I want to say, and it was the best fit. Is that correct? So, in other words, because this is the kind of the mouth or the opening, we like to say, to the downtown area, it kind of fits within that. I just want to clarify,
I
make
would-
sure that
I
I
would
have that
say-
understanding. Yeah.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, to that, I would say two things. One, I think this is a development proposal that's most in alignment with the vision for this area of the city that we had the opportunity to negotiate. And two, to be quite frank, I think this is, at least recently, the developer or the proposal that has the most capacity to actually execute on the development proposal that was put before us. We did have other development proposals for the site that were a bit more ambitious, but frankly, the capacity for those was not substantial enough to give us confidence to bring it forward to the Board of Aldermen. So in the end, I think this is ultimately the realist proposal that we saw that was in line with the city's goals. And to speak to what you said, and Manager Durfee was involved in this as well, we did receive a proposal for sort of an industrial fabrication sort of use on the site, in addition to some outdoor storage uses. But ultimately, we didn't feel those were compatible with the uses for this area.
Just good.
Yep.
Thank you. I think in my opinion, again, I'm not on this committee, so just my opinion, I would think a smaller building, smaller build, so to speak, in this area because of the steepness and so on of that small parcel would be best suited. And we don't want anything so large that it kind of takes away from that opening. It's just, again, just my opinion. And so whether this board does approve it or doesn't approve it, I think my feeling is it's a better option. And the land doesn't just sit there. So, thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor right now is to recommend final passage. Any other discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Ben Clemens.
Yes.
Alderman Derek Tebow says yes. Alderman Tyler Govea.
Yes.
And we have 4 votes yes, no votes nay.
Motion passes. New business.
Thank you very much.
Yep. New business ordinances.
We have O-25-055. I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding specific uses in the general industrial zone where overlain by the transit-oriented development.
Motion on the floor is to recommend final passage. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Ben Clemens.
Yes.
Alderman Derek Tebow says yes. Alderman Tyler Govea.
Yes.
We have 4 yeses and no nays. It passes.
Excellent. Tabled in committee, I'm going to make a motion that we remove O-24-042 from the table. This will be a roll call vote. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Ben Clemens.
Yes.
Alderman Derek Tebow says yes. Alderman Tyler Govea.
Yes.
We have 4 yeses, no nays.
So then I will go and make a motion to recommend indefinite postponement. And I'd like to, and I'll speak to that. So I just got off I texted Alderman Thibodeau earlier today or before this meeting. He asked if we could dispose of this legislation. So I said I would bring it up tonight and recommend it for indefinite postponement. Any discussion on that at all? Seeing none, this is a roll call vote. The motion on the floor is to recommend indefinite postponement. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Ben Clemens. Alderman Ben Clemens.
Yes.
Alderman Derek Tebow says yes.
Yes.
Alderman Govea.
Yes.
4 yeses, no nays, it passes.
Excellent. So now we will move into presentations. Mr. Durfee, if you want to join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which one do you want to go through tonight? Or is that just a file?
That's just a file.
Where did the thumb drive go? Oh, there we go. Okay, I was going to say.
All of them. It's going to be a long night.
I'll be taking my leave back.
Perfect.
All right, Mr. Durfee, floor is yours.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for having me back. There's been quite a lot of movement since our last session discussing the land use code back in April. The big change is we have released a draft of the code to the public. Very important step. That's the one. I have one myself. And so I'm sure you have all gone cover to cover already and have a ton of questions. It is very dense. As a recap from last session, we talked about the kind of the core building blocks of the framework that we're approaching with this draft. Those being the building types, the districts, but then also density factor, a different approach to regulating residential density. Those being the core approach to the regulation, there was then interest in seeing how the code would facilitate growth, intensification of uses and densities in the areas that were kind of called out in the master plan. Clicker for slides. I would. Is there one?
It's in yours. Derek, it's usually in your drawer.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Oh, he had it. Oh.
No, I have it, but I gave it to
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought he was still looking for it.
Nope.
My little piece. Huh.
How did he move it before? The guy was moving, right?
He brought his own, I think.
Sometimes if you just take the mouse and the keyboard, it
Can I
helps.
steal the mouse?
Of course.
The mouse and the keyboard, yeah.
Yep.
That'll be just fine. Thank you.
Be fine, yeah. Yeah, they can usually click with the mouse.
My apologies, poor planning on my part. The interest for this session was the redevelopment overlays, which is really the tool that is going to be used to facilitate growth and development in the areas of the city that have been identified by the master plan. So this is, I would say, probably the most complex part of the code. So I am going to do my best to stay high level, touch the detail points that are important to provide context to the utility of this particular tool. But basically, I want to explain all the components of the redevelopment overlay district and all the steps that have to happen, but also why someone would want to do that and what it could potentially result in. Again, the context being these areas in the colors on the map were identified by the Imagine Nashua plan as areas targeted for redevelopment or further development. So, what is a redevelopment overlay district. So we do have the ability under state statute, specifically innovative land use controls, to really get creative and be very intentional with targeting development in certain areas. This is a tool that expands on that legislative authority that has been granted to us. So we, again, following the direction from the land use code, identified these key areas, and they equate to about 20% of the total land area within Nashua. So not huge, but not insignificant. And again, these were strategically chosen. So in the picture, you see this is South Nashua. You have DW corridor there. This is a good example because these are you have two separate overlay areas separated by the Everett. DW Highway there's multiple district groups, which I will get into, within that overlay. But then on the west side of the highway, there's another overlay which utilizes slightly different techniques, but I will get into those details. Now, this is same area, but this is just the base districts. So when you look at kind of the real parcel by parcel zoning of the base, and then you look again at the overlay is really looking at a more holistic either corridor or general area focused overlay zoning approach to be more looking at the greater context, more of a planning tool, and looking at how things relate within these targeted areas. So getting into this a little bit further, I want to be very, very clear that the overlay district is opt-in only. No one is required to utilize the overlay. It is an option. It's incentive driven. I want to be very clear about that. And I put a little kind of a progress tracker in the upper right-hand corner so that you can see what we'll be covering and where we currently are. So we have, yes, we clarified that this is strictly opt-in. And by doing so, you have to follow the process, which includes the development of an urban design framework, a regulating plan, and a master plan. These are all things that happen before you go for site plan approval, which is an established procedure before the board. I will get into what all three of those things mean. And by doing so, they get to expand their development potential through a number of ways. And again, these are specific to those areas that have been mapped, again, coming from the master plan. So on the right-hand side, this is an image from the map, the associated map that's on the project website that you can also view. It's interactive. You can turn different layers on and off. That shows where the different overlays are throughout the city and the differences between them. So why would anyone want to opt in? Basically, it's a bit of an upzoning tool, which really means that they're allowed to, again, tying back to our first presentation, you have your building types, which set building size, but also density factors. Those are dictated by districts. Now, if you have the ability to essentially upzone, you can unlock higher intensity buildings or utilize existing buildings, but get more floors out of them or a more aggressive density factor. Upzoning would allow you to do that. Currently, through our process right now, upzoning or rezoning is a fairly intensive process that goes before multiple boards, and that all has to be done before site plan. So not entirely different, but I'll explain some of the nuances there in a moment. It also expands the uses, the availability of different uses within a district. So if we talk about certain areas that are currently commercial, and I think we have some context where we have the Amherst Street corridor, there was recent legislation to overlay a mixed-use district over that. Kind of a similar approach here. So we don't want to be too foreign with our introduction of concepts. We're just going to be a bit more intentional and hopefully a little bit more structured in the way that we approach development. So there's predictability both for the developer, but also for the general public. And so this is the point that I really think is going to drive home the efficacy of this structure. Right now, if you need a different district, or you need something that allows greater intensity of a parcel, again, you either are fortunate enough to have a mixed-use overlay district, which grants some authority to the planning board, some flexibility, or you get a rezoning. In this case, the rezoning, if you will, is baked into this process. And I will show you exactly how we do that. And it really comes down to this idea of district groups. So this is the base district for the Daniel Webster Highway right in the south. Commercial business primarily, because that is what is there. This has been, again, targeted for redevelopment in the master plan, really hoping to introduce some mixed use potentially. We have a lot of infrastructure down there, and we have the ability to establish mixed uses that are compatible. However, we know that traffic is a major concern. So if we were to introduce mixed uses, this setup, this new procedure with an urban design framework, regulating plan, and master plan, allow consideration of mitigation of those traffic stresses, parking stresses, well in advance of getting to planning board. And in a way, we are kind of already doing this in the sense of we have these conversations with developers before they come and submit a plan formally to the planning department. This is just adding a lot more structure, again, for predictability for the developer. And now with the overlay, you have the introduction of these district groups. You see two here, one right on the southern part of that corridor, the town center district group, and then in the orange, the mid-rise neighborhood district group. So what those mean, and I'll just zoom right into the most intense, the town center district group. Oh no, my highlighted columns have moved. Well, we will we'll look at neighborhood center, which is 4-3 from the right. I do apologize that those moved. And so basically, the important part is you have districts on the left-hand column. You have residential 40, that is the most rural, 40,000 square foot required per lot, all the way down to urban core, very intense, much higher buildings and greater lot coverage. You will see in the columns, these are different district groups. These district groups are defined by groups of districts, and those districts have certain percentages associated to them. So what that means, if you wanted to develop in the neighborhood center overlay, you have to provide 20% of urban residential, which is a relatively dense but still, single family duplex, triplex, kind of an urban neighborhood feel. But you are also allowed and actually required to provide a minimum of 30% of mid-rise 6, which means you're going to have a minimum of 30% of your buildings are going to be 6 stories. And then you have everything in between. So what that means is you don't just get a rezoning for the most intense district. You are given a slate of districts with varying percentages to encourage diversity in built form. You don't just get to build a neighborhood, to full level finish, and not at all to disparage the Mohawk Tannery, but when you look at that plan, you see 9 buildings, all the same size. That's very effective in delivering housing, but that's also, I can't really say a greenfield development, we'll say a brownfield redevelopment, where you don't have existing neighborhood fabric that you're really integrating into. Now, when we are redeveloping a corridor, say, DW Highway, you do have existing fabric that you are trying to integrate into. What this requires is thoughtful placement of less intense and more intense areas of that neighborhood so that there is nuance. You create a bit of a feeling rather than it just being everything is all the same, tall buildings. You have diversity, in the building stock. That creates opportunities for naturally occurring affordable housing because of the differential in building and unit types and sizes, but also it creates a more interesting place. So the concept of district groups is entirely new, and Alderman Jettie, I know you have been involved, you've had opinions about the the flexible use overlay district in basically the southwest quadrant of Nashua. And we've had mixed results, I will say, with the application of that set of regulations as it relates to some of the abilities that the planning board has. The big problem with it, and while it's great that it gives variance authority to the planning board, there are no caps aside from, the state statute on, the approval criteria for variances. There's no caps on how far the planning board can deviate from the base zoning. They have variance authority. They can do whatever as long as it's justified in the eyes of the court. What this provides, it provides the developer with flexibility. You have, instead of just the bandwidth of a single district, you have the bandwidth of 5 or 6 districts. But that's where it ends. You have a maximum level of intensity, but you have to provide also some minimal intensity as well. But they can play with the spectrum between there. So flexibility for the developer, but also a level of predictability for the public. We know that it can only get so intense, but we know there's also going to be, it's not going to be all intense. There's going to be a mix. And this is what that really encourages. And again, you can stop me at any time if you have questions. So looking at Mid-Rise 6 and the commercial business district. So Mid-Rise 6 was the most intense district available in that district group, and commercial district, or the commercial business, is the base. So these are district sheets within the code. These are what describe and set standards for lot dimensions, building placement within lots, and also permitted building types. These are really what drive the zoning, right? And I like that we have pictures as well to help provide some context for what buildings may look like, and then also the relationship to the street. So I chose these two because, one, it illustrates what you can do in the base district, but also what you can do in the overlay. While these district sheets primarily are speaking to the built environment, what things look like, what's absent from these, and I didn't want to put it on a slide because it's an Excel table, is use. Now, the MR6 district allows housing. Commercial business does not. So this is where we start to talk about that mixed-use overlay relationship. We have that. It does allow for housing. This is what kind of captures and translates that existing framework into what we're talking about today. So it's fair to say that opting in not only has intensity of building type and density, but it also has some use implications as well. Is that beginning to make a little sense? Okay, I don't want to lose you, so please do stop me. This is relatively dense stuff. So to further put a finer point on that, I'm going to throw up some building type sheets relative to each district. So in the commercial business district, these building types are all listed on that district sheet. You can build a shop that has its own characteristics and defining metrics. Strip commerce, very common. When you see it, it's all over Amherst Street and DW Highway. Box building, a little bit bigger, a little bit deeper building. We have a lot of big box retailers in Nashua, largely successful because of our proximity to the Massachusetts border. Block building, a very flexible building that allows the introduction of height into these areas. But then we also have some buildings that are utilized in both districts, one of which is the small general building. We have really fantastic examples of these all up and down Main Street, as well as their bigger brother, the general building. Very flexible buildings in terms of use and floor plate. These are common in both of these districts. Now, MR6 has its own building types that are exclusive of commercial business. Most importantly, the apartment building. That is not permitted in commercial business. This is truly and exclusively a residential building type. So this is really what allows that introduction of residential into these district groups and in areas where they're overlaying on top of commercial business. This is where you start getting that form that would support residential. Also, we do have lab buildings, which we're still kind of playing with to see if that is a building that we really need. They're very similar to general buildings, although there's really specific building metrics relative to high bay floors, really associated with R&D. Some of these metrics were developed in concert with some of the biotech facilities, both within the 495 Beltway in Massachusetts, but also what we're seeing a little bit in Manchester as well. We want to be open to this sort of need, so to have a building type that welcomes that is important. Those building sheets were really intended to kind of illustrate the differences of how you have these overlays that introduce new districts and district groups and how that differs from the base. So when we begin to talk about district groups, that is not the prevalent approach everywhere for overlays. Those really are specific to the Daniel Webster Highway and the Amherst Street corridors. And to kind of put a finer point on that, you look at, this is the base zoning in the downtown area, very granular, very parcel by parcel, trying to string together parcels that look similar in order to create slightly larger districts, but still very granular. Now, when we throw the overlay on, you no longer use district groups in this downtown area. It is just straight up zoning to a more intense district. And the reason for this is there is a lot of character in these areas of the city, which is really helpful in terms of informing how these areas could and should grow in the future. Because there is so much input in terms of the character that is there on the ground today, it is a lot easier to tailor the upzoning for the area. So rather than providing a developer with a district group and a slate of districts, we're being rather prescriptive in saying, this is what makes sense. If you are to intensify in this area, this is the district for you. Again, that provides both the developer and the public with predictability when the developer opts in to use this tool. You see, this is not as granular as the base is, but still fairly tight and very much driven by what is on the ground, but trying to go a little bit broader and capture larger swaths of neighborhood to ensure that character kind of stays together and that the growth is happening in areas that is appropriate and is contextual with the surrounding neighborhood. So we have two different approaches to the overlays. You have the district groups, which gives you a flexible slate, allowing the developer to choose between districts, but also ensuring that they provide a mix of area, a mix of buildings within a given area, and then you have this kind of straight up zoning, but these overlays in this context are much smaller, and in doing so, if you were to develop a 5-acre area, assuming you could assemble that amount of land in this area, you are inherently going to be contextualizing your development because you have these crossings of different upzone districts within the area. So when we begin to get into exactly what has to go into basically what the developer has to provide, in opting into the overlay, the urban design framework is really the first and foremost piece here. The developer has to develop this approach to explaining how pedestrians interact with the area. People are generally willing to walk about a 1/4 mile to most destinations. Now, that then informs uses around housing and other things like that. Now, if you're developing 5 acres, you have to introduce a street grid, most likely. Now, all right, developer, give some very intentional thought as to how that street grid and how the pedestrian activity interacts with buildings and other destinations, including civic spaces, parks, and recreational opportunities, which we heard a lot about in all of our public engagement. We really need to have more of those. And now we are asking the developers opting into this to be very intentional about where those different civic spaces, large, small, pocket parks maybe, are within this area. And again, how that relates to how far people are willing to walk. But then also, we ask for the master plan and the regulating plan. We'll define these a little bit further, but basically, if you're in a district group, now you're defining where your districts are, which districts you're choosing, and then we confirm that you're utilizing the proper percentages of those as prescribed by the district group. And we're beginning to now talk about overlaying some building types on top of this new street grid. It gives us a better picture of how, again, that connectivity for the resident experience or the visitor's experience to this area. Inclusionary zoning is also very much a part of this. You have the opportunity to get some very flexible zoning and rezone to what you need. Now, because of that, you do have to provide a certain percentage of affordable units at a given threshold. Those are really defined by the building type sheets. I don't want to dive too far into IZ because there's a lot of nuance there. That really could be a whole other session. But I just want to introduce that as this is an important part of the success of these overlay districts. But there's also building performance standards. Alderman Jettie, you did raise a question about this at our last session. We do have certain building performance standards, again, when opting into this. This is really catering towards significant redevelopment, large areas, multiple buildings. So when we are asking for higher performing buildings, chances are that ask on top of the initial or the overall capital investment that's going to be laid out for the redevelopment of an entire, potential 5 acres with street grids and all that, the ask of this on top of that is not a major percent increase over, I guess what you would normally call, traditional buildings under current energy codes. So there's a lot also in here in terms of net zero readiness, green score minimums, and mobility infrastructure. Other sessions, I would say, should be dedicated to talking about those. But again, just an introduction here. But then also transportation demand management. And this is really important because we know parking is an issue. Now, if you are able to design these areas effectively, mix of uses, recreational opportunities, a lot more trips are going to be able to be made without a car. That can have real impacts on how much parking you need to provide. Now, transportation demand management takes many forms. We're very fortunate to have a bus system. Now, as an example of one of the options in a TDM plan is a landlord, a major employer, working with the transit system to provide bus passes for all their residents or employees. That would earn them some sort of cut down on required parking minimums, things like that. And again, that also could very much be another session where we could really take a deep dive into that. But again, this is just to demonstrate that all of this is being part of, this is the give and take of opting into one of these redevelopment overlays. So again, to drill down a little bit further onto this urban design framework, it provides this kind of organizational, spatial organizational of how this district works together and functions for the people within it. Pedestrian sheds. So you can see on the right-hand side, you have these little red dots surrounded by this radius. Those are quarter-mile radii, which people would be willing to walk to. Now, when you start to overlay those on an area, you can see how much is actually walkable, but that's as the crow flies. Now, how do you align your street network to make that truly accessible. And, how often do these need to overlap? Where are your civic spaces? Where are your mixes of uses to ensure that these pedestrian sheds and neighborhood centers really do collate with what you're trying to build. We'd also be mapping the civic space network. Again, show us where the parks are relative to the people. Thoroughfares, where are the streets? How does the street grid, both for motor vehicles and for non-motorized transportation, how does that connect the buildings and the people with the destinations? And then all of that as part of the urban design framework would get approved by the planning board. So the planning board reviews this as part of the overall development package for an area. And I am going to walk through this kind of as with an example. Actually, we'll use the Mohawk Tannery because I know what I'm talking about seems new, and we're asking a lot of the development community. But in reality, this is already happening to a degree. And I also just want to mention that this urban design framework, it doubles as a public-driven area planning tool, because not only can a developer come forward with an urban design framework to cover a given area of redevelopment, the mayor, the Board of Aldermen, any member of the Board of Aldermen, the planning board, the zoning board, all of these groups can propose urban design frameworks for areas. So this actually sets up an opportunity to really drill down, on top of the master plan, on top of the zoning code, to establish an urban design framework for an area. It can be informed by corridor planning that the city commissions for Amherst or DW Highway, and that just further sets what we want to see in an area. The master plan is really good about saying, generally, this is what we want to see. The zoning code goes a bit further to say, here's all the things that you can and can't do in an area. An urban design framework is, here's where the streets go, here's where the parks go. It really becomes a real planning effort, and then anyone who wants to opt in and build under the overlay already has that urban design framework made and approved and really signed off on by the public to say, yes, build this. This is what we want to see. It's not talking about uses or building types, but more of just the general layout of the area. So, again, while a lot of this sounds onerous, this is the Mohawk Tannery. We were just talking about this earlier with Michael Devin. And this is the site plan. Now, when we talk about all these things that in the urban design framework, this is what it would look like on top of this plan. Pedestrian shed map. These are focused on the clubhouses. These are areas that maybe they have a cafe in them, they have recreation opportunity, there's a pool. This is a gathering space. What's the proximity of this to where all the people are? Civic spaces. Where do people get to play outside, find green space? Those are right here in green. Thoroughfares, mapping the streets, show us the connectivity. All of this is already happening, but this is happening on those large developments. Anytime that you really are working, and I think Mohawk is a perfect example, at scale to really deliver housing, potential mixed use of an area, the intentionality behind street grid, places for people to congregate, recreate, and meet other needs is already being thought about by the developer, because they want to build a nice place for people to live, because that's how they're going to get tenants, how they're going to sell condos. We are now just taking that extra step and say, here is how you do this well. It's in the code. Here are some parameters around what we'd like to see. Here's a little bit of flexibility to play within that. It's not incredibly prescriptive around, we want this tree here, we want this large of a park. There are ranges, but generally, this is what we want to see, and this is how we want to see it arranged. And when we talk about the regulating plan, so this is another part of the overlay, this really then brings that urban design framework into more of a zoning document. This really, basically takes that urban design framework and makes it into code for the district, or sorry, for the development, if you will. So really, it finalizes the alignments of the thoroughfares and civic spaces as articulated in the urban design framework, and it starts mapping lot and block layout. We do have block standards. These are natural lengths and widths of city blocks that we already have throughout the city, and we are just observing what those are and saying, okay, this is what, if you're building blocks, this is what they should look like. These are the dimensions, because this is what is successful, this has worked. And and a developer would do this naturally, you're building that neighborhood look and feel that's been replicated from an already successful and established area. We're just putting design standards around that. We're actually doing a lot of the work for them. And then we also begin talking about the phasing of development rights. I'll get a little bit more into phasing when we talk about the master plan, but these are all things that the developer of a large site is already thinking about. But now we're just getting, again, a bit more granular. We're more involved in the process, and we're ensuring that all of these things layer together to create a really successful development where people want to be. So, as an example, we've done this before, again, with Mohawk Tannery. We did a rezoning for them. This is part of a regulatory plan. We developed an entirely new zoning district for the Mohawk Tannery. So again, these elements are not foreign to us, but they take, right now, a very significant amount of work. Now, rather than couching all of that responsibility with the planning board, we come to the Board of Aldermen and say, here is the zoning code. We are not asking to give the planning board full authority over rezoning. Here's the area that we're asking the Board of Aldermen to give to developers to have a little bit of flexibility within. It's not the entire slate of the zoning code. It's just, here's the district group. We want to play with 3 or 4 districts to help craft these sorts of documents that would inform development within that area. So when we get into the master plan, this is really now, we've done a lot of work, we have the general layout, we have the regulations. Where do we start dropping buildings? So as you can see in the Mohawk plan, I've identified the buildings in that light orange. But this is really where we start seeing it all come together. We're talking now about the block layout, the building types, infrastructure phasing, the neighborhood centers. Again, those are those blue dots in the middle of those red circles, ensuring that you have that clustering of destination type uses and facilities that will bring people together. And we want to make sure that those are within walkable distances to the bulk of the housing in the area. The district plan, as it's informed by the regulating plan, exactly shows how the zoning matches and delivers what is being proposed in the urban design framework. And again, TDM comes in, we're talking about strategies to ensure adequate accessibility throughout, but then further connections from the site elsewhere into the community. And when we talk further about infrastructure phasing, again, this is already happening. Here's phase 1 of Mohawk's infrastructure phasing plan. We're talking about access from the roads to first building site. This is phase 2. As containment happens, what else is being built? This is really just to demonstrate, again, that these considerations are already happening at developments of scale. And we're not asking for anything crazy. We're just asking for a bit more intentionality behind it and to be involved earlier to ensure that what it results in is a really excellent place, as good development begets more good development and greater investment and tax base. And then we end at site plan approval. This is already an existing process within the city. You do all this work, you get to site plan approval. What you're coming to the planning board with is a very well thought out plan of action for development. And again, this is really, it's all opt-in, but it's really for areas of larger scale, significant redevelopment. I don't expect that the bulk of what we see at site plan is going to be the product of these redevelopment overlays. But when these opportunities come along and there's a large amount of land that is under consideration, we want to make sure that it is really successful and is done well because of the implications that that has on the surrounding land for that development and beyond. So I will kind of just stop at a summary page, and I will open it up to questions. And I do apologize for the lack of pictures on these slides.
No worries. Thank you. We'll open it up for questions, comments from members of the committee. Alderman Jettie.
Thank you. So, as you pointed out, there's a lot here to absorb. But, when I'm thinking about, the concentration on Daniel Webster Highway and Amherst Street, and you point out the development of the Mohawk Tannery. And, one of the things that I noticed about the Mohawk Tannery is that, it's there's an entrance to it, and you go into the development, and you've got housing, and you've got recreation, and you've got different things. As opposed to, what I see on Amherst Street, where it's just, a thoroughfare, and then, just a long row of commercial buildings with storefronts facing that thoroughfare. And, it's done, and I don't know how, if I had a magic wand, I would love to, change that to, so that you wouldn't, one of the criticisms I hear is that, people have trouble finding a store on Amherst Street because they're just one after another. It's very difficult to, to find anything. And, I think of other developments in other places, like, I don't know if you're familiar with, but there's a place in Mashpee, Massachusetts. It's kind of a...
Mashpee Commons.
What's that?
Mashpee Commons.
Yes.
Our code consultant designed that site.
Oh, good. So for people who aren't familiar with it, it's like a mall, but the parking is along the perimeter, and then there are buildings. It's like a little village inside, and you park on the outside of the perimeter, and then to go to these different stores you have to walk. And inside it's like a Disney village type of thing. Very very picturesque, very very pleasant, very nice, and so that's an idea that that I don't know how that's working out down there, whether that's a popular thing, whether other places are doing it. But I found it very attractive, and I don't know, Amherst Street is pretty built, and I don't know how we can go back and undo, the things that we don't like about it. But I suppose the way we start is to provide examples and incentives for, developers to I imagine those strip malls are owned, they're individual stores, but I imagine there are people who own these strip things that, might be incentivized to reconfigure it in a better way. I mean, does this allow for that? Does this anticipate that, or?
That's precisely what it's designed for. Buildings have a shelf life. I think we're also seeing big box retail is under threat from Amazon and the like. There's a sea change occurring in the retail market. We're even calling some of these overlays sprawl retrofit. The reason for an urban design framework is really to facilitate a Mashpee Commons, a rehabilitation, the reintroduction of a street grid, a very intentional design. And again, the urban design framework can be a public planning tool to say, we really want to see a neighborhood, a Mashpee Commons developed on Amherst Street, but it's not necessarily going to face Amherst Street, the road itself. There is a lot of land on both sides of Amherst Street, an opportunity there to create something. And if we're operating at a 5 or 10 acre scale, I mean, you look at the Building 19 site, 420 Amherst Street, that's 23 acres. That's a huge amount of land. And we can be really intentional with this, and we can get buy-in from the public. And when we then say, we've established this urban design framework, it really sets out a roadmap for a developer to come along and say, oh, this is what the city wants. Well, I've had a lot of success doing this up and down the eastern seaboard. This is exactly my type of development. I know the market, and it may end up making Nashua more attractive to certain developers.
Well, thank you.
All set, Alderman Jettie?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Clegg?
Thank you. The area that you just mentioned, that's a large area, something like that, I'd love to see something built, but there was threat in the past of a Walmart going there with an auto and hairdresser, and that abuts conservation land and so on. So do these plans take into consideration some of those abutted protected lands?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so, right, you're looking at the base district, we want to allow, this overlay is really not for everyone. But because it exists, there's inherent value on those properties. So perhaps if someone, has been a longtime holder of real estate and, maybe doesn't, the strip mall is deteriorating, this isn't for me, but someone else knows about this overlay and really sees an opportunity, there's the incentive, that free market incentive from a regulatory landscape to entice someone with vision to come in and do something excellent. Obviously, there's contextual considerations like conservation land and other sensitive features, which those are handled in the code relatively similar ways as they currently are, really stemming from best practices relative to how development interacts with the natural environment, but also those natural resources also serve as amenities and can count towards green score in this required open and civic space. So while it's not just let's turn our back on the conservation land, we can't put a parking lot there, well actually now it's giving the development a benefit, because now it's an amenity for the people experiencing the development itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. It took me a little while to come to the table on this, as you know. I do like the idea of coming up with different ideas for the builders, and but I have still two little concerns. I'm going to start my first one with the biggest one that you probably can't answer, but I have to ask it. Are there unintended consequences, such as the asphalt plant sneaking in somewhere that we're not anticipating? In other words, we put here, so I mean, I look at a particular area that has, urban mill, urban core, and, mid-rise, and I look at the different areas of the hamlet versus the neighborhood and so on. Is there a potential that with this type of overlay that we could end up with some undesirable industrial within that particular neighborhood, region, or district, and now suddenly we have to go to court and fight and say, no, that's not what we meant. We really don't want a stinky asphalt plant here.
Sure, no, I greatly appreciate the question. We still have a use table, possibly another session. What's great is we're calling this a hybrid code. You have form-based code and you have Euclidean zoning, which is very traditional, separation of uses, and form-based being it's all about the built form of the building type. Well, to go one way or the other, you lose the great things that are associated with the other type of regulation. So we're taking the best of both worlds. And now, while we want to be very specific with how, neighborhood makeup in terms of buildings, we are also sensitive to uses. Our current use table is over 300 uses long, which is a bit excessive. And how do you calculate parking standards for a palmistry and metaphysical store versus a donut shop? All these sorts of nuances that, just the level of regulation is dizzying. There's so much compression that we can, in collapsing of the use table that we have done. We're very sensitive to past lessons learned. And I think that the legislation that was before you tonight is a perfect example of, wow, we ran into a real issue with zoning and we are fixing it. We are rolling all of this into the new code, being very intentional about some of the things that the positive zoning changes we've made in terms of overlaying mixed use in other areas. But as we've seen with GI and TOD, you can go a little too far. So we are taking very hard looks at those. We're stress testing to making sure that we don't have any of those unintended consequences. I know I can't just sit here and say that we've thought of everything. There are absolutely no intended consequences. This is a perfect code. I can't say that. There's always going to be something that way out of left field that we never thought of. I think we're going to be in a much better place than where we are now from a regulatory perspective, and hopefully resulting in much better built form.
Perfect answer. I love it. Thank you. The next question that I have is, if they opted in, does this take, I don't know whether to say pressure or authority away from the planning board, and if they feel that this is going to affect maybe the neighborhoods on the outskirts of this particular neighborhood based on what that developer wants to put on the outside? That, again, my concern, because we still have abutters elsewhere and so on.
That is an absolutely excellent question. Also very topical to some of what we've seen recently at the planning board. We, and I have had these exact conversations with our consultants, going through the map on a block-by-block basis and identifying areas where, hey, look, we have mid-rise 6 up against urban residential. That is not going to work. We need to have a step down in intensity, build in these natural district buffers of intensity, this gradient, to ensure that we are not building a 6-story building on the south side of a small bungalow. And that's part of what the role the district groups play. You have that gradient of intensity, but when you partner that with the neighborhood centers and the pedestrian map, the neighborhood center is the cluster of that intensity, and it gets less intense as you pull away. So you have, as encouraged by the district groups, this natural gradient of intensity that is spatial in nature. So we are trying to be very gentle in transitions, but also allowing for that intensity where it's appropriate.
Just to clarify. So if I were to take a circle, you're talking about putting the larger pieces in the center and making the smaller pieces come out,
Yeah, essentially.
so that anything that's abutting isn't being affected by this big overshadowing, similar to what we've seen in some of the things up in planning. You don't suddenly have this high-rise shadowing over a home or something of that nature.
Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Alderman Clemmons, you all set? Okay. Take that as a
I
yes.
guess so.
Take that as a yes. I'm not even sure if he's still on the Zoom. I should log in.
As I say.
No, he is not even on the Zoom anymore, so, perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Durfee, appreciate it.
You bet.
That was very dense, but I think it's good. I think it's, we're chipping away at the recode process, and I think that's really good for this committee to kind of do the deep dive in it. So
Yeah.
I appreciate your time tonight, and I'm sure we will be seeing you in the future.
And I would just ask, what would you like to see next?
We got.
Everything. You haven't read it?
I mean, what do you think we should,
So-
what do you think the next big thing is that
So
would
we
be good
have,
for the committee?
I mean, inclusionary zoning is pretty major. parking and mobility is pretty major. And some of these we can collapse together and kind of take in step. Use standards, the use table. I would say look at that and see if you have real questions. It's a bit simpler than what we currently have, which I think is a good thing. General administration, I mean, that's really weedy and kind of boring, and it's not all that different from what we currently have, but we have some new concepts that we have to administer slightly differently. And general site standards, kind of just a reinvention of what we currently have. But I would say affordability, IZ, and how we got to some of those numbers is very important, though we may not be ready to have that, because I really want to bring in our consultant as well as RKG, our sub-consultant, and really get into the weeds about the market dynamics and the stress testing that we did, cost of construction relative to national rents, to really find like how far can we go until it just breaks? Like what does it actually take to internally subsidize a 30% AMI unit? We've done all these calculations. It's very thick, but it's good. And I think that this committee should be provided with that information, and we can demonstrate, you know, we've done the math, and while it may not work to get a 30% unit, I mean, that's what LIHTC projects are for. But 80, 100%, we can do that, and here are the numbers. So that could be really good. Parking, it's also just,
No. I think parking's
one.
something we should definitely tackle on this committee.
Okay.
I would probably steer away from doing it in the July meeting, just because it's July, and that's usually not a good month to be doing hard-hitting topics. Maybe we'll do that near the end of the summer, when people are starting to focus a little bit more.
Okay.
So maybe for July, we look at something a little bit more low-hanging fruit, not so much
how about
heavily debatable.
we can do site standards and green score. So site design and then how we calculate green score, because those are related. Little lighter. I think actually pretty fun. The whole green score concept is complicated but ingenious, and once everyone figures it out, I think it's going to result in really great stuff. That's not just cookie cutter, but also very intentional in green
Sounds like a
infrastructure.
good July
Sounds good.
topic.
Okay,
Well,
without objection, let's pencil that in.
Great. We'll rope lighting in there as well.
Great.
Okay. Excellent.
Anything else?
Check out the code and the map. NaturalRecode.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
May I
Thank
make
you.
a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, we're looking at this huge, huge book, but if you go to the link that was provided to us, and I did share it with my constituents, and I kind of went through chapter by chapter. I mean, there are some things we can break down, and I did have some constituents that were quite interested in even some of the nuances that were within here that they didn't understand. A lot of this is old stuff. But a lot of it is new too. But I think for us, that interactive map was really interesting to click on that and to see where the new areas were that were being rezoned. You know, a lot of it is downtown, but to see which wards were being affected and so on, and to see where suddenly you can have a mid-rise 6. You know, how close is that to the neighborhoods, the NRs or the, R15s or R7.5s? I really think that map alone tells you a lot, but as huge as this is, you can actually get through it if you take like bites at a time. It really wasn't as bad. Boring, yes, but it wasn't that bad.
Don't
I think
read
it's
it
worth
cover
it.
to cover. Go to the table of contents and jump around.
I did go cover to cover.
It's almost like when you read it cover to cover, it's like you're waiting for the plot twist. Like, I read this thing in the beginning, I'm waiting to see how it comes into play, and there at the end, oh, okay, it all makes sense. But
I think
not a
that's
great way to read
kind
a
of the-
regulatory document.
I think how we're tackling it is pretty good. We're hitting it in hour increments, and I think that's a perfect amount of time to digest something this comprehensive. So
Yeah.
Excellent. Last thing I'll say is we will be at the summer stroll with a table, and that will likely be the kickoff for kind of a week-long community engagement intensive, very similar to what we did for Code Week in May of last year. So last week in July is what we're targeting for real public outreach. gives enough time for it to be out there and to people to chew on it a bit and hopefully come with some good questions and really try and break it. That's the idea.
Excellent.
Poke holes in it.
All right, without any other comments, we'll move on to general discussion that we basically just had. So public comment, there's nobody here, so I will close public comment. Remarks by Alderman. Seeing none, we will look to Alderman Jettie for a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Perfect. The motion is to adjourn. We do not have Alderman Clemmons on, so we do this by voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:59 PM.